Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
आई महाराज आई महार महाराज आई महार गुलशन में लिए फूल के हार महाराज आई महार महाराज आई महार मेरे दिल में भी ताजा उमंगे बढ़ी मेरे दिल में भी ताजा उमंगे बढ़े और तू ये बढ़ी और ये कैसी बढ़ी लिए फूलों के हार महाराज आई बहार महाराज आई बहार मस्ती से डाले जो यूं तू मुझे मस्त से इनकी आंखें लड़े मस्ती से डाले जो यूं तू मुझे इस मस्त से इनकी आंखें लड़े आज हर फूल पर है नई ताजगी रंग चोखा अनोखा है खुशबू नई गली पे पुकारी जो दिए सुना लिए फूलों के हार महाराज आई बहार महाराज आई बहार आज फूलों का बुलबुल से प्यार होने को है आज फूलों का बुलबुल से प्यार होने को है आज थालों में संदल आने को है आज प्यालों में उपटन आने को है आज थालों में संदल आने को है आज प्यालों में उपटन आने को है आओ तराने छेड़े नए आओ मिलजुल के गाने गाए नए आओ शादी रचाए शोर हम सब नए ये शादी नहीं आओ दुनिया बदलने का दिन आ गया लिए फूलों के हार महाराज आई महाराज महाराज आई महाराज
Chandidas was released on 24th September 1932 and it ran non-stop for 64 weeks at what was then the Chitra Cinema. The story of the legendary singer-poet was a bold expression of social ideas, technical excellence and lyricism. The phenomenal success of the Bengali Chanidas automatically led to a Hindi version in 1934. And the novelty of pure humanism prevailing upon the evils of untouchability was a new development brought into the new art form called the cinema, then of course the bioscope. The cinema became full of new ideas, new innovations and new experiments. And there was a huge public response to what was then a new banner, new theatres. The man behind it, Birendranath Sircar. Birendranath never directed a film, but he was the quintessential patriarch, known universally as B.N. Sircar. His great-grandfather was Pyaricharan Sircar. He was an educationist and grammarian. His English primer is still a useful guide. His grandson, Birendranath Sircar, was a leading lawyer whom the British singled out for special recognition. Sir N Sircar was actually the first Advocate General of Bengal inducted into the Viceroy's Council from 1934 to 1939. Birendranath Sircar strayed away from the family tradition. But how did the young civil engineer, brought up in the best traditions of Bengali aristocracy, stray into the curious business of filmmaking? We went to his son Dilip Sircar to find out.
Aha! I was expecting this question because so many others have asked me the similar question. It so happened this question is very natural. So I asked my father one day as to why he had joined the cinema after he had come back from London as a very successful civil engineer. You know, my father, Mr. B.N. Sircar, had a tremendous sense of humor. In reply, he told me that in his civil engineering business, he had the misfortune of seeing that his last bills were never paid. So one day when he was driving along the then Cornwallis Street, now called Bidhan Sarani, he saw large queues of people standing in front of cinema houses. I think those at that time belonged to Madden theatres, who were the pioneers of the cinema business in this part of India. And he saw these huge queues of people buying tickets to see something of which they knew nothing. So the product, irrespective of the quality of the product, this was some business where the people had to pay first. So he naturally thought that this was the most wonderful business.
Almost 70 years later, the commercial equation survives. People still pay first. B.N. Sircar was among the first of a new class of producers. The year was around 1928. The Bhawanipur Club was the meeting point of the young intelligentsia. The man who left the strongest impression on Birendranath's mind was the smart and smooth-talking impresario, Horen Ghosh. It led to a business partnership that met its first test in a silent film.
The name of the particular film in Bengali is Buker Bojha. Translated into English, it would mean the heaviness of the heart. When the film was released, it literally turned out to be an heaviness on the heart.
The disaster of Buker Bojha would have driven anyone away, but B.N. Sircar never looked back. This time, it was P.N. Roy and Jyotiretu Chhayam who helped him set up the International Film Craft in 1930. The new company began its journey with a silent film, Chorkata, directed by Charu Roy, whose wife was perhaps the first educated woman to join films. Chashar Mein was made the same year by Prafulla Roy. Both were unmitigated disasters. B.N. Sircar realized that times were changing, and he had to change as well. That is, sing to the tune of the world's first talkie, the jazz singer, made in 1927. The year was 1931, a crucial year for cinema and for B.N. Sircar. Adesh Irani's Alamara, the country's first talkie, had already been made with great success. B.N. Sircar launched new theatres on 10th February 1931. Its maiden venture was Dena Pauna, Bengal's first sound film, directed by Primankur Atorthi and based on Sharat Chandra Chatterjee's best-selling novel. B.N. Sircar had by then set up the Chitra cinema. Opened by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, it was the marketing centre for Sarkar's Bengali films, leaving New Cinema opened by Sharat Chandra for the Hindi films. New Cinema, 172 Dharamtala Street, became a landmark. Adjacent to it was the Bengali cinema's most proud establishment, the Office of New Theatres. But it was not all a bed of roses. Ours is a crisis-ridden path, he had once said, and the first major crisis was the fire of 1940.
August 1940. My father was a great football fan, and on one such occasion at that time, he was in Mohun Bagan ground watching a very important football match between Mohun Bagan and perhaps Aryans, yes. A gentleman came and whispered something into his ears. He went out of the stands but didn't come back. It was later revealed that the message which was conveyed by the gentleman was that the new theatres was on fire. He just stood in front of the laboratory and watched the entire effort of new theatres for 1 decade in the 30s, that is the negatives of so many important productions, just going up in flames in front of him. People who had also watched my father at the time when Chandidash and Puran Bhagat were roaring successes and had helped new theatres back on its rails, said that the expression at that time was exactly similar to what they saw when they saw Mr. B.N. Sircar standing in front of the laboratory when his films were going up in flames.
One crisis followed another in quick succession. The war broke out, resulting in a severe shortage of raw stock. The quota allowed to new theatres hardly sufficed to sustain a large establishment. The final blow came with the communal riots, the partition, the wave of killings, and the virtual shutdown of cinema halls. It was the biggest test that new theatres had yet faced. It was only an establishment like new theatres that could hope to bounce back into the reckoning. And bounce back it did. The ideology, imagination, and sheer power of tradition left their mark in Uday Pote, later remade in Hindi as Hamrahi. But trends in filmmaking were changing, slowly but surely. The rest of the country saw a distinct shift towards spectacular productions, lavish sets and costumes, opulent devices, everything that money could buy. The sheer size and scope of the blockbusters mattered more than their social and human relevance. It was a trend new theatres could not adapt to. N Sircar was still the patriarch and leader, but began to reveal himself in new directions. He was a member of the first Film Inquiry Committee appointed by Jawaharlal Nehru and headed by S.K. Patil in 1951. The report of the Film Inquiry Committee paved the way for the Film and Television Institute, the Film Archive, Films Division, and finally the Film Finance Corporation.
First ever seminar on cinema held in post-independence India, where he is presiding, and which was graced by none else than the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, with the first President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad.
His social connections went well beyond the domain of films. They brought him into contact with people as far apart as Birendranath Tagore, the then Viceroy, and Mr. Satyamurthy, leader of the opposition. And soon he became a cultural ambassador of sorts and joined film delegations to America, China, and several other countries of the world. At home, he was also actively associated with the film societies.
In 1966, we organized an Indian Film Festival, quite a big one, and at that time there was no Indian Panorama or any festival of regional films as such. At that time, we approached Mr. Sircar to be in the advisory board, which was formed at that time, and we organized several film shows at Academy of Fine Arts, and we organized a very big exhibition on the history of Indian cinema. For the exhibition in particular, we used to call on Mr. Sircar, who was sitting at the time as a small office at the ground floor of New Cinema. He was coming every day in the morning, and at the time he was wearing a British type of dress, you know, suited, booted. Afterwards, he gave up that dress and he was always wearing dhoti and spotless Punjabi on all the official occasions. But at that time he was like that, you know, Pakka Englishman, and he was smoking like a chimney, and he gave up smoking completely after some time, I think. And at the time he not only consented to be in the advisory board, he volunteered to give us a lot of publicity materials like still photos, posters, booklets, etc., etc., and gave us access to a room which was at the New Theatre Studio number 1, and thus we became acquainted with each other.
N Sircar's commitment to social and artistic values was reflected in the film he presented at the time blockbusters had flooded the scene. What he presented was a travelogue, a spiritual journey, a quest for truth. The film was Mahaprasthaner Pothe, later remade in Hindi as Yatvik. And if the film depicted something of a search within oneself in the spiritual ambience of the Himalayas, it could even have stood as a metaphor for the struggle new theatres and N Sircar had to survive in a changing climate. Yatvik only proved that tradition and class still had their relevance. It was a roaring success and helped new theatres to carry on for at least a few more years. But the moment of truth had to come sooner or later. If the world of the cinema was changing rapidly, it was not in the character of new theatres to compromise on its basic values and convictions. It remained in business with its head held high till Bokul in 1955. Bokul was made in 1955, a box office disaster. And with that, the story of new theatres finally came to an end.
आवाज की दुनिया के दोस्तों, फर्ज कीजिए कि किसी की खुशी की दुनिया बर्बाद हो चुकी हो और जहां तक उसकी निगाह जाती हो उसे अंधेरे की निराशा और निराशा के अंधेरे के सिवा और कोई चीज दिखाई न देती हो। ऐसे वक्त में उसे क्या करना चाहिए?
करूं क्या सन्निराश भई, करूं क्या सन्निराश भई, करूं क्या सन्निराश भई, करूं क्या सन्निराश भई, दिया बुझे फिर से जल जाए, रात अंधेरी जाए दिन आए, मिटती आस है जो तकियन की, मिटती आस है जो तकियन की, समझो गई तो गई, करूं क्या आस निराश गई। जब न किसी ने राह सुझाई, दिल से एक आवाज ये आई, हिम्मत वा सबल बढ़ आगे, रोक नहीं है कोई, हिम्मत बान सबल बढ़ आगे, रोक नहीं है कोई, कहो ना आस निराश भई, कहो ना आस निराश भई। करना होगा खून को पानी, देना होगी हर कुर्बानी।
নিউটনের স্থাপন হয়েছে ঠিক নির্বাক যুগের শেষে এবং সবাক যুগের গোড়ায়, সেই সন্ধিক্ষণে প্রায় এই নিউটনের জন্ম। এবং কেন হলো সেটা বোধহয় নিহাত সবার বলেই হলো, কারণ আমি কোনো কারণ দিতে পারবো না। আমার সঙ্গে যারা কাজ করেছিলেন তারা সবাই নতুন লোক, এবং প্রথম এইটি করে আমাদের সুবিধা ছিল যে আমাদের আগে কোনো অভিজ্ঞতা সেরকম ছিল না, কাজে আমরা কোনো ধারাবাহিক রাস্তা আমাদের অনুসরণ করতে হয়নি। আমাদের নিজের যে মত, সেই মতই আমরা ছবি চালিয়েছি। আর আজ পর্যন্ত প্রায় 130খানা ছবি হিন্দি ও বাংলা নিয়ে করা হয়েছে, এবং সবাই প্রমথেশ বড়ুয়া, জগৎকুমার বোস, নিতিন বোস, হেমচন্দ্র সবাই এখানে কাজ করেছেন, সবাই ভালোভাবে কাজ করেছেন এবং মন দিয়ে কাজ করেছেন। তো অভিনেতা অভিনেত্রীর পূর্ণ সহযোগিতা আমি পেয়েছি, কারণ ফিল্ম তৈরি করাটা একটা টিম ওয়ার্ক, এটা কোনো ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল ব্রিলিয়েন্সের উপর খানিকটা ডিপেন্ড করে বটে, কিন্তু আসল জিনিসটা হচ্ছে টিম ওয়ার্ক। সকলের সহযোগিতা না পেলে ছবি হয় না, এবং নিউটনের আমার ভাগ্য ভালো যে আমি সকলেরই সহযোগিতা পেয়েছিলাম।
जब न किसी ने राह सुझाई, दिल से एक आवाज ये आई, हिम्मत वा सबल बढ़ आगे, रोक नहीं है कोई, हिम्मत बान सबल बढ़ आगे, रोक नहीं है कोई, कहो ना आस निराश भई, कहो ना आस निराश भई। करना होगा खून को पानी, देना होगी हर कुर्बानी, हिम्मत है इतनी तो समझ ले, हिम्मत है इतनी तो समझ ले, आस बंधेगी नहीं, बंधेगी नहीं, आस बंधेगी नहीं, कहो ना आस निराश भई, कहो ना आस निराश भई, कहो